The experts are taking bets on whether Diddy will go free, probation, or time in jail. Nobody really knows. They were wrong about the RICO. They told you he was going to get convicted. But they were wrong. So why should we believe them now? Let's get into some of this straight game.
Life is like those cards. It's not what you dealt, but how you play it. Play each situation correctly. I remember they used to laugh at a brother.
Welcome back, guys. Welcome back. It's your boy DELRAY, Richardson, platinum artist, platinum songwriter, Straight Game TV. I thank you for tuning in. I appreciate your time. Do me a favor. Click on the thumbs up button. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already. And like I always say, if you want to be one of the first people notified when I drop some of this straight game, please do me a favor and click on what appears to be that little bell notification right below this video. I'm going to get right into it. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to cut through the smoke around one of the most controversial topics in this legal firestorm, in the most, I would say, or should I say one of the biggest trials in the music entertainment industry, other than the Michael Jackson case, ladies and gentlemen. Sean Diddy Combs, basically we know, was cleared of the most serious criminal charges, yet still faces potentially a life-altering sentence, right? This coming October. And so here's the real question, because you got a lot of people out here basically trying to predict, reading sentencing guidelines, talking to experts and what do you think? And, like I said, once again, and they were wrong about the RICO. They were wrong. You had heard so many people when they came back with the partial verdict. You had so many people saying, oh, they're guilty. It's guilty. Usually it's guilty. They were wrong. They were wrong. And so why should you or I believe them now in regards to how much time a Sean P. Diddy Combs is going to get, right? So the real question is this. If Diddy was found not guilty of the worst crimes, does his accusers still hold power, right? You got to ask yourself that. Well, didn't get convicted of the sex trafficking, didn't get convicted of witness tampering, didn't get convicted of bribery, and the host of other charges that they tried to get him with, right? He got convicted of basically the two lessers, which was the Mann Act, right? So if Diddy was found not guilty of the worst crimes, does his accusers still hold power? And if so, what kind of power are we really talking about, right? So let's break it down. Let's get into some of this straight game. Let's examine why probation may be still off the table even after a not guilty verdict on the most serious crimes, right? And you got to understand, like I told you before, and we'll explain why Tisa tells YouTube commentary is clouding the conversation with more drama than actual depth, if you will. So just drama, no depth at all. It's just, doing a whole bunch of talking, but ain't really saying nothing, right? So let's get into some of this straight game, right? What Diddy was first, when you think about him being not guilty of the most serious charges, right? And why that truly matters as to who has the power in this situation, along with Diddy, this being his first offense, if you will, right? Let's start with what everybody is tweeting about. Diddy was found not guilty. Okay? So with that being said, and him being found not guilty of the criminal sex trafficking, drugging with the intent to exploit, the racketeering, related conspiracy charges and all of those things that he was found not guilty of. Make no mistake, ladies and gentlemen, those were the most serious allegations, as we know. And in a court of law, he beat them. He beat those most serious allegations, ladies and gentlemen. Like I said, despite people wanting to still, hold him guilty for that, he beat those charges, right? That's important. It's very important, right? That's real. That's a fact. That's not something that, he did, but I feel like he was still guilty. Your feelings don't matter. The fact of the matter is he was found not guilty of those most serious charges, right? That must be acknowledged, whether you want to acknowledge it or not, whether I want to acknowledge it or not. But here's the twist. And the twist is, being found not guilty doesn't mean you're innocent of everything. And that's a fact also. It means the prosecution couldn't meet the burden of proof for those charges. And that is true, right? And that distinction is crucial when we talk about sentencing, civil liability, and victim impact, if you will, right? And let's flip that on its head. And just because the prosecution also couldn't meet the burden of proof doesn't mean that any of it was actually true. People came in, they testified, some people tripped up, slipped up, Breonna Bongdalen, Mia, and everybody else that came in, Cassie, Jane, everybody told their story. But we're still hearing stories out in the public right now that, and one of the things, like I said, if you watch the Art of Dialogue, he has over there now, Clayton Howard. And Clayton is laying out some things, and I can see why the prosecution didn't want Clayton to come and testify like he had a Daniel Phillips and the guy that they called the Punisher, right? But listen, the distinction is crucial when we talk about sentence, civil liability, and victim impact. You understand what I'm saying? Because even though the criminal jury walked him somewhat, finding him not guilty on the most serious charges, you got civil courts, right? Victim statements and the pretrial sentencing report are painting a very different picture, or trying to paint a very different picture, ladies and gentlemen. Sometimes I think it's unfortunate, but like I said, one shouldn't put themselves in the place where they can be judged like that, right? So let's get into that. The power that the victims may or may not still have, right? Despite the verdict, Diddy's accusers, those who've filed civil claims, submitted victim impact statements or testified behind closed doors, still hold real power. Do they or do they not? Tap in and tell me what you think. Do you think that Breonna Bongdalen, do you think Cassie Ventura, do you think Jane Daphne Joy, or do you think Capricorn Clark, do you think all of these people, Mia, do you think all of these people still have a lot of power, even though Diddy was found not guilty in most of the charges that relate to them, right? And was only found with the interstate trafficking and engaging in prostitution with the Mann Act. Chime in, tell me what you think. Do you think they still hold power? I mean, with the judge and so on and so forth, even though Diddy was found not guilty of bribery and coercion and fraud and all of the other things that they were trying to, find him guilty of, right? So when you ask that question, you get into the victim impact statements, right? The VIS, right? These are included in the pre-sentencing report and can heavily influence how a judge perceives the character and consequences of a defendant's behavior. Now, I say that to say, it can be that way, but it also, the judge can say, hey, you know what? This is Sean P. Diddy Combs' first bite at the apple, his first time really getting in trouble, and he can be lenient. Or the judge could consider the victim impact statements, right? And try to be a little bit harsh. We don't know what he's going to do. But these are some of the things that he possibly can do. The civil litigation aspect of it. Cassie Ventura now settled the case, and the fresh allegations from Clayton Howard, former escort, still exists outside of the criminal ruling, ladies and gentlemen. once again, the picture that Cassie painted versus the picture that Clayton Howard is painting, like I said, he's over there on the Art of Dialogue, giving a hell of an interview and hella details about what happened involved in that situation, right? And he's suing Cassie and Diddy, alleging basically some of the same things that Cassie alleged against Diddy, if you will, and before she received her settlement. So that's going to be a really tricky situation, if you will. More lawsuits, should I say, are pending, and these plaintiffs can still win damages based on the preponderance of evidence and not beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the difference between civil and criminal court. In criminal court, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. In civil court, it's the preponderance of evidence. And so, like I said, Cassie has a lot to think about in dealing with this Clayton Howard situation, because that's a civil case. We're going to see basically what happens with that. That's the one to watch. Like I said, I don't think that Cassie wants to go through that process again, because once again, it will be a spectacle, as it was with the Diddy situation. Now that Cassie has been thrust into the limelight a little bit more than she was through her music career in dealing with this unfortunate situation, right? The public perception and judicial sentiment also are going to play a factor. Even without a criminal conviction, right? A federal judge may weigh repeated allegations, which and that's a tricky one. Repeated allegations, because they're saying, like, if more than one person saying that you're doing it, then it more than look like you're doing it. You understand what I'm saying? But like I said, I don't think that should be considered. I think the evidence should be considered, like I said, whether it's beyond a reasonable doubt or the preponderance of evidence. But even without a criminal conviction on the most serious charges, let me say that, a federal judge can still weigh basically the repeated allegations, evidence of a coercive control, behavioral patterns, right? And like I said, once again, if you're listening to what Clayton Howard is saying, I think, well, if the judge is watching, or they're paying attention to this, I think it's a different picture that you get of Cassie. It's a different picture that you get of Diddy. And like I said, Clayton Howard said one thing that was important. He said that the prosecution didn't want to listen to what, I don't know if, I think he might have interviewed with the prosecutors when they were trying to tell them about Cassie. They didn't want to listen. So they already had their mind made up as to how they wanted to go about the situation with Diddy. They didn't want to hear any other alternative story or any other truth, for that matter. And therefore, Mr. Howard is now suing Cassie as well as Diddy for the same thing that Diddy sued Cassie for. So it's like what went around is coming back around, if you will, right? That's why his victims do hold power. That's the reason why Diddy's victims hold somewhat of a little bit of power, but not in the way the public thinks, if you will. So not in the way that a lot of people are trying to convey this information. And so they won't put him behind bars directly, ladies and gentlemen. I don't think, right? But they may influence whether the judge chooses probation or prison. And that's a thing. Like I said, once again, I'm looking at it from a perspective, first time offender, and let's stop with the, all of those things are gone now. We're dealing with this right here, the Mann Act. Okay, what was it really? Okay, it was this. Everybody was a participant. And like I said, what Clayton Howard is talking about is real powerful, because like I said, if they were looking for real victims, I believe that, like I said, as well as anybody, the male escorts or male prostitute, whatever you want to call them, they were real victims too. They went. You didn't hear, like I said, they were hired by agencies. When you think about the big picture, okay. And like I said, so much so that it was telling that what Clayton Howard said on the Art of Dialogue when he talked about how he was engaging in older white couples, right, in their 50s. That was primarily his customer base. And then he all of a sudden got a call from Cassie. So that goes to show you that this situation, this male escort, threesome freak off thing has been going on for a very long time, right? So it wasn't just Diddy. And now that Clayton is talking about that, it shines a new light. You got to check out the interview over there on the Art of Dialogue, ladies and gentlemen. So you got to understand that. So why probation is looking more not likely, right? I wouldn't say that it's off the table, but it's looking more not likely. We don't know, but let's talk about it. You know what I mean? So now, despite beating the biggest charges, Diddy isn't walking away clean. Here's why. Experts say, and this is the reason why I started the video that way, experts have been saying, right? Different channels, Fox, CNN, and all, have been saying, and this is how I witnessed it, right? What do they think that Diddy will get? How much time? Here's why experts say probation may not be an option, right? The pre-sentencing report, this document includes testimonies from victims, prior behavior not formally charged, any signs of obstruction, threats, or witness tampering. Judges rely heavily on PSRs, and we've confirmed through legal insiders, basically, that this one is not favorable to Diddy. So now, you got to understand that, understanding everything that they tried to do, the black juror being dismissed, the statements that they made about certain things about, in some of the rooms that they were doing the freak-offs, there might have been guns there. They were trying to lean heavily and hardcore on this coercion thing, this fear thing, right? But like I said, once again, a lot of experts on Fox, on News Nation, all of these other channels say, well, how much time do you think Diddy might get? Nobody really knows. Nobody really knows. And neither do I. But like I said, they were wrong about the RICO situation. And like I said, I would hope that the judge, right, wouldn't rely on trying to appear tough versus being fair, right? That's the thing that I'm thinking about. More importantly, trying to be fair. And hopefully Diddy is getting some kind of help, some kind of counseling to help him with his demons and with his shortcomings, right, if you will. The pattern of misconduct. Even if he didn't break one specific federal statute, the pattern of behavior can still trigger enhanced sentencing under federal guidelines. Now, once again, it's at the judge's discretion. You can believe what you want to believe, and people have said what they wanted to say. When Breonna Bongdalen was found to be lying about the situation, when the prosecution thought that it was going to work, they were happy and gung-ho. When Westmoreland came up there and contradicted it and had her Perry Mason moment, right? It was like, oh, wow, that she admitted that she had talked to Cassie the day before she testified, and they were talking about the story, and what the defense was basically trying to say is they were trying to get their story straight. You know what I mean? About the situation where she said Diddy hung her over the balcony, right? So public scrutiny and precedent. Judges don't operate in a vacuum, ladies and gentlemen. And that's what I'm saying. With cases like Weinstein, R. Kelly, Epstein, setting the tone, leniency for celebrities is no longer automatic. And we've seen that, right? We've seen that with Epstein, R. Kelly, and Weinstein, if you will. So it's no longer automatic, like I said, once again, depending on the charges, if you will, right? Financial means and flight risk. Now, once again, we just heard that bogus story that Tisa Tells did in regard to Diddy trying to escape or whatever, right? Simply not true, ladies and gentlemen. Simply not true. Diddy's wealth and global connections might make a judge question whether probation is enforceable or sufficient. I don't think that should be even a consideration, ladies and gentlemen. Like I said, he was convicted of the Mann Act. Let that be what that is. Stop trying to don't stop trying to do the OJ move when OJ got caught in Vegas for that stuff that he did in Vegas, and they gave him basically the maximum that they could possibly give him. And most people felt like they really went hard on it because they got the not guilty verdict in Los Angeles and due to the murder situation, right? You know what I mean? It's unfortunate, like I said, but judges don't operate in a vacuum, if you will, right? So what's the translation over in all of that? Even without a guilty verdict for the top charges, he could still face real time. That's a fact. That's a fact. Depending on how the judge is, and like I said, this is a high profile case, and a lot of times, judges want to appear to be tough, but hey, we never know, right? And that's the thing that makes this a great situation to anticipate, if you will. So tell me, let me tell you this, ladies and gentlemen. I want you to understand. Let me tell you why Tisa Tells is getting it all wrong. She's getting it all wrong. These clickbait titles, claiming to have, this information that she simply does not have. It's just a bunch of rambling on, right? Tisa Tells, this content creator, right? Tisa Tells, this content creator has made dozens of videos. I'm talking about dozens of videos about Diddy and Diddy's case, right? Some reaching hundreds of thousands of views, right? Kudos to Tisa Tells. But here's what she consistently failed to provide. Each and every time, ladies and gentlemen. I just told you the information that I was relying on where I'm listening to the experts and so-called experts and attorneys and things like that talking about why Diddy might not get probation. What Tisa Tells, when she talks, what she fails to provide, even in putting out certain clickbait titles, is no legal experts, ladies and gentlemen. No legal experts at all. No verified victims. None. Zero. No verified victims at all, ladies and gentlemen. No interviews with lawyers, paralegals, or analysts. None. None. Zero. As it relates to the conversation that's going on now. And by her own admission, ladies and gentlemen, by Tisa Tells' own admission, she hasn't even seen the pre-sentencing report. But she reports on it like, hey, you know what? I'm in the know. You guys are not. Here's why it's bad. Blah, 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 blah. The boogie ghost is coming. Y'all better watch out. And all of these scare tactics. And basically saying, oh, the trial is not over. Yes, it is. Whether you choose to move on or not is simply up to you. But the trial is over. It's just as simple as that, right? And like I said, we don't want anybody to go anywhere. We want y'all to stick around to hear this straight game and facts and people who are on YouTube giving you real factual information, or should I say substantive information, in which you can be informed and make informed decisions and have intelligent conversations, if you will, right? So ask yourself. You got to really ask yourself, ladies and gentlemen, how do you build a narrative around a sentencing outcome when you've never even reviewed the most critical document the judge will rely on? This is what Tisa Tells has been doing. Once again, I'm going to ask the question again. How do you build a narrative around a sentencing outcome when you have never reviewed the most critical document the judge will rely on? Tisa Tells needs to stop it. It's unbecoming. It truly is. You don't and you can't unless what you're building is not coverage, but just content, right? That's not coverage. That's content. You're not covering anything. You didn't cover any kind of facts. He didn't give any people anything to digest, right? I just told you where I got my information from, and you can see it yourself. All you got to do is click on it and see it, watch the news. You know what I mean? To be informed, to see these, same people who they asked about Diddy being convicted of the RICO Act, and a lot of them said yes. Some of them said no. Harvey Levin got it right from TMZ. He got it right. He said, I see them not really being able to convict the RICO, but getting Diddy on the Mann Act. And it came to fruition, right? So you got to ask yourself, right? And so at the end of the day, what is it really going to be? What the pundits are saying? What the talking heads are saying, right? Or will the judge be lenient? Will the judge be super hard, right? Listen, Tisa may be passionate, right? Like Tisa tells her take on the stories. It may come with a little bit more passion than a lot of people, right? But without expertise or evidence, they are just takes. Or should I say tells? You see what I'm saying? Like somebody's take on something can have a lot of passion, oh my God, all of this, that, and the other. But without expertise or evidence, they're just takes. My opinion on this, or whatever have you. Like I said, I don't really know what Diddy's gonna get. These are the facts in regards to what the possibilities are that can possibly happen, right? But we're gonna have to wait and see what really happens with this case, and with the sentencing, right? And when you have, no evidence and you have no expertise, that's not the same thing as truth, ladies and gentlemen. It's just simply not. It's not the same thing as truth. So like I said, we're gonna see what happens next, y'all. So where do we go from here? Where do we go from here, right? The sentencing is scheduled for October 3rd. The PSR is complete. And insiders, right, say it's damaging, right? Some people who are speaking out basically saying, hey, you know what, it's damaging. But what do they know? Do they know really what it is? Like I said, yet a lot of people, and damaging in what way? I mean, what more? And it shouldn't be no further or distant from what was in the trial, right? But we'll have to wait and see if they make that information public, what's really in the pre-sentencing report, if you will, right? The judge has discretion, but is expected to weigh what? Usually in cases like this, in most cases, right? The pattern of conduct, victim statements, influence, abuse, a potential for repeat offenders. And so now you can understand why that thing came up about the jury, right? The juror, if you will, So, the dance, a little shiny object once again, ladies and gentlemen. Listen, civil cases are still unfolding. We know that. And victims still have power in those arenas. So the idea that Diddy won and it's all over, I wouldn't say no, I wouldn't say yes. I would think he won in certain senses that he only had to spend the rest of his life or potentially the rest of his life in prison, ladies and gentlemen. The other end of it is if the judge tries to be overly harsh than what he actually can be or should be, Diddy is definitely going to appeal. And they're going to look at, once again, when it gets outside of, the victim impact statements and all of that, then you're just going to get down to the law and the precedent that usually was set in similar cases dealing with Diddy's and how much time people actually got. You see what I'm saying? So on one hand, the judge can take all of these things, the pattern of conduct, victim statements, influence abuse, potential for repeat offenses, and all of those things are in consideration, right? The civil cases, people talking about what they're talking about in the civil cases, the allegations there, right? So the idea that Diddy has won, that's a slippery slope. On one end, personally, this is what he feel. On the other end, I would have to say the jury is still out in a lot of those cases, but the main jury that I think Diddy was most worried about has already spoken. And so for that being settled already, I think he probably finds some kind of a peace of mind, if you will. So we'll have to see, right? I wouldn't say that we are, we're in the middle of the game or the end of the game or the beginning of the game. Like I said, once again, civil is different from criminal. And like I said, somebody suing you for $10 million based on them saying that you did something that wasn't proven in criminal court. I think it should have less weight in civil court, But remember, OJ was found not guilty in criminal court, but found liable in civil court for the death of Ron Goldman. And so, like I said, once again, slippery slope, the ponderance of evidence in civil and beyond a reasonable doubt in criminal. So we must understand that, right? So listen, no matter how many thumbnails Tisa tells posts, right? The outcome won't be shaped by YouTube uploads, ladies and gentlemen. Did you hear that? No matter how many thumbnails that Tisa tells posts, the outcome will not be shaped by her thumbnails or her rhetoric, right? It'll be shaped by legal facts, witness credibility, and judicial integrity. Once again, not by YouTube uploads, not by Tisa tells conversation, not by rhetoric, but it'll be shaped. The outcome will be shaped by legal facts, witness credibility, and judicial integrity, ladies and gentlemen. Right? So, we're gonna wait and see, right? And like I said, when you're dealing with emotions, versus evidence, or should I say facts over feelings, right? Look, this is a heavy case. It's been a heavy case. People have been watching all around the world. There are real victims, ladies and gentlemen, real victims. They are serious allegations, and there's a complicated truth in the middle. A very complicated truth in the middle, right? But truth doesn't live in hot takes, meaning truth does not live in people's perspective. Tisa tells hot takes and what she thinks, and the loud and boisterous thumbnails. Diddy in trouble. Trouble in paradise, or whatever else you want to call it, right? Truth lives in testimony, evidence, and law at the end of the day. And the jury said that's what they went by. And also, it lives by accountability. Like I said, Diddy's team said that, he was accountable for the domestic violence. Couldn't argue with that. I mean, you couldn't really argue with that because we all saw it, right? So whether Diddy walks free, gets prison or probation, right, or faces, a lengthy time in a Camp Cupcake or a penitentiary, one thing is clear: the victims were heard, they shaped the record, and no verdict, no creator, no clout chaser can take that away. Get it? I'm gonna say it one more time, ladies. So whether Diddy walks free, gets probation, or faces prison time, one thing is clear: the victims were heard, the alleged victims were heard, they shaped the record, right? And no verdict, no creator, no clout chaser can take that away. Nobody, right? So like I said, once again, ladies and gentlemen, I thank y'all for listening. I appreciate your time. More importantly, I appreciate your ear. And all of the people who subscribe, your boy DELRAY, straight gang.
Life is like some cards. It's not what you dealt, but how you play it. Play each situation correctly. I remember they used to laugh at a brother